Abraham Lincoln was born on February the 12th, 1809, in a small log cabin in Hardin County, Kentucky. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, were farmers, living a simple life shaped by hard work and uncertainty. Like many families of the time, they faced land disputes and economic hardship, eventually moving to Indiana in search of stability. Life on the frontier was demanding. Young Abraham spent much of his time working the land, chopping wood, and helping his father build their home. Formal education was scarce. He attended school only when he could, but he had a deep curiosity. He borrowed books wherever he found them, reading by firelight after the day's labor was done. In 1818, when Abraham was just 9 years old, tragedy struck. His mother Nancy fell ill and passed away. Her absence left a void in the family, but his father soon remarried. His new stepmother, Sarah Bush Johnston, brought warmth and encouragement. She saw potential in Abraham and supported his love for reading and learning. As the years passed, the Lincolns moved once again, this time to Illinois. By 1831, Abraham, now a tall and strong young man, set out on his own. He left behind the farm life, stepping into a world of new possibilities. He was not yet a politician, not yet a leader, but he carried with him the lessons of hard work, resilience, and an unshakable desire to grow. Abraham Lincoln's formal education was brief, scattered lessons in one-room schoolhouses, adding up to no more than a year. But where schooling was scarce, his hunger for knowledge was boundless. He borrowed books from neighbors, devouring them by firelight, each page a step toward something greater. The words of Aesop, Shakespeare, and the Bible shaped his thinking. He studied law, not in a university, but in the quiet hours between labor. He scribbled notes on wooden planks, practiced speeches alone in the fields, and pondered the great questions of justice and democracy. In New Salem, he took work as a store clerk, where he listened more than he spoke. He read newspapers, debated ideas, and slowly built a reputation, not just as a man of wit and honesty, but as someone who could turn words into influence. His first attempt at public office ended in failure, but Lincoln did not retreat. He served briefly in the Black Hawk War, then returned home, determined to build a future. He read law books cover to cover, teaching himself until, at last, he passed the bar. By 1837, he arrived in Springfield, a young man without wealth or privilege, but with a mind sharpened by perseverance. He was no longer just a student of words. He was ready to shape them into action. Lincoln's philosophy was not formed in the halls of great institutions, but in the quiet moments of thought, in the pages of borrowed books, and in the simple yet profound lessons of frontier life. He admired the founding fathers, their words shaping his belief in a nation where all men should have the chance to rise. As a young man, he spoke often of law and justice, believing that fairness and reason must guide society. But it was slavery, the great stain on the American promise, that troubled him most. Traveling down the Mississippi, he saw men and women in chains, families separated, human lives treated as property. He never forgot what he witnessed. Yet, Lincoln was a man of patience. He understood the weight of politics and the limits of idealism in a divided nation. He spoke carefully, argued with precision, and when the moment came, he stood firm. In the debates with Stephen Douglas, he made his stance clear. Slavery was not just a political issue. It was a test of the country's soul. To Lincoln, the Union was more than land and government. It was an idea, a promise of democracy. He believed that a nation built on self-rule could not survive if half of it stood on the foundation of oppression. And when the moment demanded action, he did not hesitate. By the time Abraham Lincoln took office, the nation was already breaking apart. 11 states had seceded, raising their own banners, marching to war. It began at Fort Sumter, a moment of fire and smoke that would ignite 4 years of bloodshed. Lincoln's task was nothing less than the survival of the Union. He called for volunteers, knowing that victory would not come swiftly. At first, his army stumbled. Defeats in the East, generals too cautious or too reckless. The weight of command was heavy, and the toll of war grew with every passing month. But Lincoln was not only a wartime leader, he was a moral leader. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, shifting the war's purpose. It was no longer just about the Union, it was about freedom itself. From that moment on, there would be no turning back. Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and the slow grind toward victory. With Ulysses S. Grant leading the armies, the tide finally turned. But the cost was staggering. Families torn apart, cities in ruins, and a president aged beyond his years. Then, in April 1865, at Appomattox, the war ended. Lincoln did not celebrate. Instead, he spoke of healing, not vengeance. He looked beyond the battlefield, beyond the bitterness, toward a future where the Union might be made whole again. When Abraham Lincoln entered office, his focus was clear: preserve the Union. But as the war dragged on, another truth became unavoidable. The Union could not be saved without addressing the cause of its division. Slavery had shaped America's past, but Lincoln believed it should not shape its future. For months, he weighed the decision, knowing the risks. A bold step could cost him political support, even divide the North. But after the hard-fought battle at Antietam, the moment arrived. On New Year's Day, 1863, Lincoln took up his pen and signed the Emancipation Proclamation. With that stroke, the war changed. No longer was it only about restoring the Union. It was about freedom. The proclamation did not free all enslaved people, but it set the course. It gave hope to millions. It ensured that the war's outcome would decide not only a nation's borders, but its moral soul. By war's end, nearly 200,000 black soldiers had fought for the Union, proving that the fight for freedom was shared by those who had long been denied it. And in 1865, the 13th Amendment put slavery to rest, not just in wartime, but forever. Lincoln would not live to see the full measure of his work, but his words endured. His vision of a government by the people, for the people, did not die with him. It lived on, reshaped by time, carried forward by those who believed in the simple, unshakable idea that all men are created equal. The war had ended. The Union had been saved. On April 9, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered, and Abraham Lincoln allowed himself a moment of quiet relief. He had led the country through its darkest trial, but his thoughts were already on the next battle, rebuilding a fractured nation. On April 11th, he gave what would be his final public speech. He spoke of the future, of the rights of the freed, of the work that was not yet done. But in the crowd that night stood a man who did not celebrate Lincoln's words. John Wilkes Booth listened, and he decided Lincoln must die. April 14th, Ford's Theatre. The play was light, the mood joyful. Lincoln, seated beside Mary, smiled as laughter filled the hall. At 10:15, Booth stepped into the president's box. A single shot rang out. The laughter stopped. Lincoln was carried across the street, his breathing shallow. Doctors worked through the night, but the wound was too grave. At 7:22 a.m., April 15th, 1865, the President of the United States took his final breath. The nation grieved. Crowds lined the streets as Lincoln's funeral train made its slow journey home to Springfield. Flags were draped in black. The man who had saved the Union was gone, but his words, his vision, his belief in a nation undivided would endure beyond his years.